that's what we're saying, Siavash. Like, why has it become so out of balance that we're doing so much service delivery and community development's being marginalized? So obviously community in the community development signifies collective work, people working together in supporting one another. It's to recognize that power isn't something we just have as individuals, but it's something we gain in relationship with others. So the community part of community development is about us bringing people together or supporting people who are in relationship. And so when we talk about community economic development, it is about people coming together to tackle their economic challenges with one another. And obviously development, we all know what development is. Well, you know, I still don't quite know after many years, but my really strong academic position on development is it's to help people get unstuck. You know, we all know that we're not feeling like we're in a process of development when we're stuck. We're not sure what to go, where to go. We have no options. So development is about having more options and feeling unstuck. So community, working together, development, getting unstuck, having more options with others. Putting those two things together was also a movement, and this is something we were talking about in our planning, a significant movement from private to public. It's to recognize that when we are alone, and if you're a young person who's been unemployed for a long time, keeps failing in jobs, losing their job, being thrown around by private agencies, you tend to start to think it's your fault. I'm unemployed because I am ignorant, stupid, not as good as other young people. It's my fault. And community development shifts that. We support people to recognize what they think of as their private concern is a public issue, a shared issue, and therefore must be solved publicly. And that's what community development tries to do. It says, let's get together and recognize our personal experience is not our private concern, and let's tackle this as a group. So that's the community development bit. The community economic development bit is to insert the issue of economics into the process of development. And I think this is to recognize that at the base of most of our lives is both secure shelter and an economic base. Ultimately, you know, we need those two things. And so it's great that we're having a conversation about economics. People are scared of economics. I think the news presents economics in a way that mystifies us. But the truth is we are all into economics because we all spend our money. And the beauty of economics is it cuts through the shit. It shows us what we value. What we spend our money on is what we really value as individuals and as a society. And I was saying to the group last week when we were preparing, you understand what a society values by working out what it subsidizes. You follow the money trail to work out what a society values. So we're concerned with something of deep value: economics, survival, wealth creation. And community economic development is a long tradition of people coming together to solve their economic challenges, creating shared wealth. And I say it's a long tradition with sincerity. It's something that's been forgotten, but has existed. The cooperative movement is a couple of 100 years old. Around the world, people gather in groups and share money, pool it into joint savings accounts, so they can draw on that when they have a crisis, or they can buy goods at a better rate using their shared money. There's a whole revival of social enterprises, although that's not necessarily a community tradition. It can be a sort of heroic tradition. Even community gardens represent a bit of a revival of the community economic tradition. And there are many others. And just, I won't say much more because we want the story, you know, and I'm not pushing the Labor Party because we all know the Labor Party's abysmal in many ways, even though we prefer them, many of us, to the Liberal Party. You know, the old aspiration of the left was to have the Labor Party as a political party of workers. The union movement was their negotiating base for better safety and, you know, income in their jobs. And the cooperative movement was meant to be the third part of the movement to create a new economy that challenges hyper-capitalism that's only focused on profit. So the community economic tradition is very interested in creating wealth, but it's shared wealth. And we're going to hear a story of the Nunda Cooperative, a 21-year-old cooperative, and I work with a 22-year-old cooperative. And the fifth largest corporation, one of the largest corporations in the world, is the Mogdragon Cooperative in the Basque region of Spain. It's worth people having a look at this. And there's even evidence that that cooperative during this pandemic has supported its thousands of employees who also own the business, because that's the difference between cooperatives and normal businesses. The workers also own the business, has supported its workers in Spain better than any other business during the pandemic. So cooperatives are one part of the community economic tradition, and we're going to hear that story. There are many others, and I would love us to, you know, answer the question, what's the role of the youth sector in this tradition? And the first part is educating ourselves. So handing over to Richard, Dan, and Susan. Very excited to hear your story. I hope that made sense.
It made sense to me. Thanks, Peter. Hello, everybody. Yeah, it's a great grounding for our story, because all the elements really, it speaks to our the process we've gone through. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners standing here on Turrbal and Yagara land in Brisbane, in Nunda. And I'm here with a colleague and founding member, Susan, who was there in the early days. Susan, would you like to say a quick hello to everybody?
Hello.
Right. Good to have you here, Susan.
Thank you.
If it's okay, I might start telling the story of the co-op, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion around your roles, your different roles in the co-op. Okay, and if, as I'm telling the story, if there's something you want to jump in on, just do that. Okay, a memory or something comes up. And I'll just give people a bit of background on this, because I've got a bit of a presentation which I'm not going to go through the whole thing. We prepared it last year. Actually, Susan was part of a group that prepared it for an address to the Community Development Conference in Toowoomba. And Susan was part of a group, and myself and a few others who prepared that. So I'm going to use some of the slides from that, but I'll skip through a few. It was called the Les Halliwell Address, and Les was a sort of founding lecturer, academic and practitioner in the cooperative space in the University of Queensland. So really brought the participatory development tradition to Queensland in many ways. So the talk's named after him, but we won't go into a lot of some of the detail. I'll share this with you and I'll just talk through the story. It says only the host can share. See if I'll see if I can. No, it's not letting me share. Okay, I'll just. Is that okay? Yeah.
Yeah, 1 second.
That's okay. Great. Oh, here we go. I can do it now.
Yeah, Vash,
Okay.
I've just changed the settings. I hope that was okay.
It is.
Oh, thanks. Okay, that's great. Okay, share my screen. Oh dear. Hold on.
Is that working, Richard?
Yeah, that's working now. Yeah, yeah. I'll see if I can get here. Oh, look, I'm being baffled by. I'm on my iPhone. I'm being baffled by the technology. It's actually not that important. I'll just tell the story because I don't want to get bogged down in technology. And it's a humble story. It's a humble story. So it starts, but see if you can identify the elements Peter spoke of in the story, because they're the fundamental, actually before the economics. I mean, you could start with an economic beginning, but this really starts out of a development process. And I think it's actually much more powerful than the economic aspect, although economics is a really important part of it. Anyway, so it started back around the time, 22 years ago. And in Nunda here, there's an organisation some people might know called Community Living Association. And Community Living manages a number of programs, so some service delivery. So some programs working with youth at risk, young people exiting child safety or having involvement in the criminal justice system, young people with disabilities, intellectual disabilities. And CLA also has a tradition of supporting what we call people's organisations, so groups where people have a role or have a say and some control over how that group runs. So it's not just a group run by CLA, it's a group CLA supports for people to develop themselves and build capacity in regards to that. So anyway, so CLA has a bit of tradition of doing that. So one of the things we were noticing at the time, or workers were noticing, was that people were coming and telling the same story. So it was that warehousing experience Siavash alluded to, that, I tried to get a job. I went to the employment agency, they gave me a job, I lost the job. Some people, this had happened to them 20 or 30 times. They'd done a TAFE course, they got a certificate, but no job. So the worker, so people were feeling bad about that. Why can't I keep a job? Have I done something wrong, or is it me? And the community worker had some experience in development work and said, well, when this sort of thing happens, you bring people together. So the community worker invited 8 people to come together at the Nunda Neighbourhood Centre, a couple of volunteers, and organised a public meeting. And people talked about their experiences of trying umpteen times to get a job and not being able to, with that job not either existing or the job not being the right job. And there was a really powerful movement from people thinking this is my fault to, hold on, if this is happening to 8 other people, it's not my fault and there must be something wrong. There must be something wrong. So the workers said, look, do you want to do something about it? And everyone said yes. So they started a very small informal jobs club. So it wasn't even an organisation at this point in time. And they started doing, the community organisation resourced. So they actually, CLA actually resourced this project because they believed in the importance of it. And I think social work students were involved. So it was, and volunteers. So it was a group effort, and the people themselves. And they started doing small things, just experimenting with, they went to the Rockley markets and got veggies and, delivered veggie boxes and made some money off them. They had a chicken coop and they made cut sandwiches for the local community organisations, mowed a couple of small backyards, that kind of thing. And Susan, you were involved in those early days, I think, weren't you? With Dave Langdon. Anyway, so pretty sure you were involved. Anyway, so that group sort of continued on. And then the next step was it incorporated as a co-op, as a workers' co-op around the time, just a bit after Praxis Co-op, and set out a task really to build the economic element into it, so build its economic capacity. So the group knew that there was no funding around for this kind of thing they wanted to do. They wanted to create long-term jobs for themselves. So they set they knew their shared agenda was about creating work. And they did some sort of workshops around it and realised their core thing they wanted to do was create long-term meaningful employment for people with cognitive intellectual disabilities. So that was their core focus. And of course, there's no money around to do this kind of thing. Everything's transitional. It's flow through. That's where the money is. So they decided on an enterprise model. So why don't we create our own businesses which create employment for ourselves? And as I said, they started small with very small scale experimental kind of stuff to get people used to work. And these are people who often would say things like, I'm just sitting at home drinking coffee all day and going mad. I sleep through the day because there's nothing to do, and my brother and sister work, but I can't find work, and I just feel so bad about myself. So people were saying these kind of things, and so it was it took a bit of support to get people into a space where they were in a work pattern and build some skills up and whatnot. So there's a good experimental phase, and then the community organisation supported the group to. This was a key step in terms of inserting the economic element into it. Was participated actually in a local planning session in Nunda. So the council were going through and doing some urban improvement, and the group participated in a local planning meeting and requested 3 small parks to mow. And that actually got on the community plan. At the time, a big New Zealand multinational was mowing all the parks in Brisbane. And anyway, it got on the plan, and then the group followed up, and the planners said, oh, well, lots of things get on plans that don't happen. But the group kept following up around these parks and worked with council to create the first social procurement relationship in Australia, where this little group of 8 people, and social procurement is where government or corporations selectively give work to social enterprises or community organisations to generate social impact. So this little group really pioneered that in Australia. And it was a bit of a process because council were like, oh, well, there's competition policy and it's all kinds of things we've got to work through. But we managed to work it through with them to their great credit. And now it's it's very common across Australia, social procurement, and it's a growing movement, and there's organisations that support it. So, yeah, so this little group of people, it just shows the power, I think, of that movement from, I to we, where together we can do something, and from a private to a public concern, that this is something that is actually a systemic issue that we can influence and resolve. So that was an important plank in the economic security of the co-op, because the gardening contract actually grew to, it's about 50 parks now, and we maintain the local corporate shopping centre that's run by corporation, housing department. We look after a lot of local parks, the local streetscape, whatnot. And it's good. It's a good base of income, which creates lots of hours of employment for people. And then another business we set up was a cafe that was in the CLA building. There was a vacant sort of space that we turned into a cafe, which creates employment for another group of people. So now we've got about 40 employees, the majority of whom have cognitive disabilities, and some other people from refugee backgrounds. And the last little bit I'll tell before we have Susan and I, we have a conversation with Susan, is the model is one that's really adaptable, and we've had other groups come to us. So recently we had Multicultural Australia come to us, and actually communities, so Bhutanese refugees who were in a similar situation, long-term unemployed, couldn't find work, spending a lot of time in the job agencies, to no effect. And they approached us and said, can we do what you've done? We see what you're doing. We took that to the co-op members, and everyone agreed they wanted to support these people who are approaching us from refugee backgrounds. We supported them to develop a business. There's a number of groups we've supported to develop their own businesses or social enterprises. A really great one, if you can look it up online, is called the Mountain Mowing Men, and they're from Bhutan, and they'd been previously been in a UNHCR camp for about 20 years in Nepal. Great story, but the same sort of model of coming together and working out how to create employment for themselves when nothing else was working. So that's a bit of our story. If you want to find the presentation I was going to use, which has got all these sort of elements in it, it's actually on the Community Development Queensland website under the Les Halliwell address. So CD Queensland, there's a series of Les Halliwell addresses, and there's some great presentations there. And our one should probably be the most recent one, and it's just a PowerPoint slide. Yeah. Okay. So that's sort of me. I was here to talk about sort of the story, and then we're going to have a chat with Susan about what she does in the co-op. So, hey, Susan, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Richard.
Hey, Susan, tell us what do you do in the co-op?
I make the sweet stuff at the cafe.
Yeah, you make sweets at the cafe.
Yeah,
Yep.
and under vessel too.
And you work at Nunda Vessel too.
Yeah,
And what do you do? What happens at Nunda Vessel?
the bottles.
Yep. So we've there's a lot of stuff that goes on at the co-op, and Susan works in an eco business on the main street that's run by a local social entrepreneur who approached us for support, and it's around you know, bringing your bottle in to fill up your soaps and your potions and things like that. And Susan's got a job working there, and she also sells the entrepreneur sells co-op products in there. And you work in the cafe.
Yes.
Making sweets, espresso train. We may walk around there later. And you've also got another job. You're a researcher at QT.
Yes, I'm a researcher too.
Yep. So we're doing a piece of research at the moment with QT, and Susan's a co-researcher, so interviewing other people starting micro businesses, which we do a bit of at the co-op. So what's it like working at the co-op, Susan?
Very good.
Very good. What do you like about it?
Nice and friendly people.
Nice and friendly.
And you get money.
And you get money. That's it.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yep.
And free coffee too.
Pretty good coffee. Yep.
Yeah.
Occasionally get a free coffee. Yeah. So we might walk you around there later. Have you got anything else you'd like to say, Susan, to people or about the co-op?
About the fruit and veg boxes.
Yeah. Did you do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how we started the co-op.
That is how we started the co-op. And I remember I was a young youth worker in the day, and I remember buying those veggie boxes off you when I wasn't involved in the co-op. So you should be very proud of yourself for starting the co-op, Susan, with those other people. Okay, so thank you very much, Susan, for sharing your story.
That's okay.
Yeah. And I'd just like to let people know Susan is probably the best marketer we have as well. She really gets out and promotes the co-op, which is very, very helpful to us.
Richard, I've got some raffle tickets too.
And raffle tickets too for the musical. Yep, okay. Great. Okay, so we'll pass over to Dan now, who might sort of talk about that's the sort of history and a bit of the framework. And we've published our framework, and we're happy to talk to anybody about what we do and share our story and knowledge if you want to follow us up later. But without further ado, we'll pass over to Dan, who might talk about like sort of this new project about trying to develop a new youth co-op and what the reason is behind that and the process around that.
Can I just say something first? Susan, I think
Yes.
Dan is your cheerleader. He was cheering you on then. He's your number one cheerleader.
Oh, can I say one more thing? Just one more thing. If you want to see the scale of these, like, so Susan and others started doing veggie boxes. We had a reasonable development process behind it, and we got a bit of business stuff going, and now it's turning over about $1 million from trade. So, and
so it was like $2,000 in the first year. But what drove it forward was that I think that movement from those movements Peter talked about. So I think that's what's really sustained it. Yeah. Anyway, that's me. I could yap on forever about it.
Hey, Richard. Everyone, do you want to help us for the Nunda All Stars?
Okay, we can mention we can tell people about Nunda All Stars maybe after Dan's talks. Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay, that's another project.
G'day everyone. As mentioned, my name is Dan. I just, before I get started, just like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara people, the custodians of the land on which which I sit today. As Richard mentioned, up in Nunda at the moment. So as sort of Richard was sort of telling the story, a lot of the things that sort of he mentioned, talking to sort of young people at the moment, things are still, really similar. Nothing has, we were talking about, a lot of this storytelling. And so I started late last year to start a new youth arm of the co-op. So, that sort of ages 16 to 25 with young people with either learning difficulties or intellectual / cognitive disabilities who have been through child safety or through youth justice. So just spending time with sort of people who sort of been interested. We sort of, very similarly to sort of what Richard was saying originally, we sort of, brought a group of young people together with some of the original members. So some of the people that started with Susan, over 20 years ago. And one of the things that we noticed was that the systems haven't changed. In fact, it's probably got worse. People being churned in and out of these big systems of employment and that sort of thing. Young people who have gone around and handed out hundreds of resumes to never get a phone call back, or at the age of 21 being forced to sort of do work experience for sort of multi-million-dollar grocery companies and not get paid. So over the last few years, the co-op's had quite a few people, quite a few young people who have expressed interest in joining. But through the work that we've been doing, there hadn't been that space. So a little bit of funding was organised through the Thriving Cohesive Communities grant, which was able to bring me in to basically follow in the footsteps of Susan and the original founders. So I mean, it's wonderful to be able to really, to be able to bring together, the new generation. So we've got a couple of young people on board at the moment, but really being able to bring them together with those who have sort of gone before them and who really understand the issues involved. And I think we're one of those things very similar to Richard saying about that initial group of sort of 8 people sitting there and identifying that this isn't, while it's a personal issue, it's not a unique issue. And 20 odd years later, this is the same conversation that we had at a bit of a expression of interest day only a few weeks ago. So one of the big parts of this this project will be a lot of peer involvement. So having people who have sort of walked this journey previously and sort of honoring the tradition of what's occurred and bringing them in to work with myself and a group of sort of 5 or 6 young people to start a small small community business. And we're starting from scratch. So there's no, oh, you know, this is what we're going to do and this is the business activity or anything like that. It is, you know, as Siavash said right at the start, it is really a sort of a participatory project. So absolutely everything, you know, will come down to working, you know, with the group, and my say as the worker isn't any more valuable as those as part of the project. I'm a member just like everyone else. So, you know, everything from, you know, some of the small policies and guidelines of how we interact with each other, you know, all the way up to what are we going to do? You know, how are we going to start to create meaningful employment for, you know, for this small group, and to grow it so that we can, you know, in 20 years time be able to have this, you know, conversation with another young group. Because, you know, one of the things that I've really noticed since being on board is, you know, with the co-op, it's just such a collective way of living. So people who, you know, are members and who work, it's really, you know, it's a big family. And I think that's where, you know, Peter was talking earlier about, you know, co-ops going for hundreds of years. A lot of the time they are, you know, families working with families. And that's something that I've really noticed here is that, you know, everyone is, you know, it's quite, you know, close knit, and it's that real sort of sense of collective action. So as Peter and Richard mentioned, that's, you know, that private concern, and then, you know, coming together and moving it into public action. Because at the moment, yeah, there's not a lot happening in sort of, you know, with the employment spaces. As I said, everything seems to be, you know, the way it was. And especially, you know, you throw in, you know, a global pandemic, and the employment is that much harder. I think for me, one of the big things though around, you know, I guess the whole byline of this is of, you know, what the youth sector can do. I think it is very much about working with. So rather than, you know, just saying, okay, well, we're going to grab 6 young people and we're going to start a community business and we're going to go and do this, you know, that's a service delivery model way of looking at employment, as opposed to a really sort of participatory way. So it's wonderful to be able to use the framework that sort of Susan and Richard and the sort of, you know, originators of the co-op have sort of put before us. So yeah, I think that's about me. I had a few other things written, but it's just, I think for me that the big thing that comes out of it is just, you know, bringing people together, you know, people being able to share their stories and to understand that, as I said, while our stories are personal, they're unique. They're not unique, rather, you know, and not, you know, these sorts of situations aren't our fault. We're not, you know, there's no sort of blame for being sort of churned in and out of these bigger sort of systems.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Peter, Susan, Richard as well. Richard, was there anything else, or Susan, that you wanted to say before we move on to the next section?
Oh, look, we're happy to just, I think it'd be good to have some conversation, I think. That's, yeah.
We were going to have a break, but I think we're a bit short of time. So if it's okay, we'll just keep going. So I guess this is a chance for you to ask questions, either raising your hand using the raise hand, or wave to us, or put it in the chat box. We got one coming in, first one saying, it's actually Amanda asking, what resources are needed to set this up? Would any of you like to talk about the resources needed to set something up?
I'm happy to start off on that. You need to get, the resources come from multiple areas.
and they're really driven by, as everyone said, they're driven by that core agenda of a group of people. And then that gives you the drive to go and find them. And you develop a focus too, which helps you. So, so in terms of our story, if you want to unpack that, there was resources that the sort of parent organisation lent in terms of worker time, actual financial resources. The group went to, the group had its own resources like people's time, people's energy, volunteers. There was space in community organisations that were lent. We went to, for loans, no interest loans, to actually some charitable foundations. So Sisters of Charity, and there was another religious organisation that gave us some money. There are grants around too you can apply for, so lots of those around. You've got to get looking for those. And there's also the other resource that you've got is, I mean, procurement is a resource. So if you can get a contract with government, and there's organisations that help you with that. So one is social traders, if you set up a social enterprise. So they actually do work around trying to find procurement opportunities for community organisations. And the other one is the Social Enterprise Council, which was another project that Nunda supported along, and it's an example of a second tier organisation, or, you know, we brought groups together around social enterprise to form a council that now has about 180 members around Queensland. And that came out of a community development approach. It doesn't now, not all the members there do development, have a development style, which is fine, but it came out of that sort of development tradition in Queensland. So there's an example of some places you can go to for resources. The other sort of framework we use is one of the leaky bucket, which is in the presentation. So, and that's a classic community economic development tool to use to look at all the resources leaking out of. So you've got a bucket with holes in it, right? And the water in the bucket is the money that's moving around in the economy, and the water that's dripping out is money that's going outside. So, and you can go, okay, where can I plug a leak in the bucket? So, you know, mowing is going to New Zealand multinational. So can we plug a very small bit of that to keep it circulating in the community? So that's one way to look at, just analyse what's going on. And in the community economic development tradition, there's a range of tools like that. So that's me, sorry. As I said, I can wrap it on.
Thanks, Richard. No, that was really good. Appreciate that.
And just on that, Amanda, I just think people as well, you know, people bringing their networks, and, you know, because I think especially in participatory development, you know, I think people and connections and relationships are probably one of our best resources.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Can I just add, I mean, in this tradition, I mean, I think, you know, whilst 90% of our work gets sucked into service delivery, it's good if managers say, well, let's put some time into not servicing young people, but bringing them together, the young people we have contact with, and hearing their stories and building that understanding that, you know, you're not unemployed because it's your fault, and we could solve this together. And so there's an investment from the organisation in some developmental work, you know, and then when there's a group of young people in partnership with the organization, there is money around, you know. And Praxis Co-op, we give money to organizations that want to start cooperatives. We invest a percentage of our income. So you could also talk to us because we're committed to building other cooperatives. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
we've
think
started
yeah,
a similar model, not a similar model, but we've started in the youth justice space. So yeah, we've actually brought on a worker using revenue from other areas of the organisation to do some intentional community development work in the youth justice space with some of our young people, and about trying to develop leadership and change trajectory of those young people. And yeah, I think this could be the next step from that.
Right. We had another question about how can young people get involved in youth co-ops?
Is it youth co-ops or the youth co-op that Dan is starting or Dan is enabling?
Yeah, well, the actual question says in their youth co-op. So yeah, Christina says their youth co-op. So
that Dan is starting. Dan, how do young people get involved, mate?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously depending on where they're based, but a lot of at the moment the sort of the starting group, similarly to sort of the original founding group, that we are sort of we do work with CLA quite closely. So at the moment, a lot of the young people all the young people that we're talking to have a relationship with CLA. And that's allowing us to sort of be able to work with them in obviously the employment space, but then to know that they have the other supports needed as well, you know, so that, you know, for the other aspects of their life, that they're able to have their support networks there, and then we're able to support them, you know, in the employment space. But yeah, moving forward, you know, people can always pop in and have a chat and come and see Richard or myself, or come and have a chat with any of the co-op members. And but I think overall, you know, and then, you know, even if there's not space, you know, depending on, you know, the time and everything with us, is that we're, you know, it's always that kind of thing that we can sort of, like Richard was saying, we can, you know, help to, you know, have a chat with other people or organizations, so that they can bring people, you know, that they know together, to sort of replicate it, rather than, I guess, sort of, you know, finding something that's already existing.
right.
Yeah, I'd like to second that. We're really keen to work with people, because we're still pretty relatively small. So, and as Dan was saying, based in a partnership with CLA, that's a really important connection in terms of, because in the co-op, we don't do the social work, the youth work, we're employment. But we've got a very strong partner relationship around with that. So that's an important connection that helps people maintain employment whilst not crossing getting mixed up in terms of us getting into doing counselling or youth work. So we've got a strong partnership with CLA, but we're really interested if there's people in your locale, or encourage people to come together and talk about it. And then we're happy to sort of share what we know around that process of development.
Yeah, I guess as I mentioned, we also wanting to establish a small community of learning as well. So the survey that comes out, please fill that up. And if you're interested, give us your email address and contacts, and hopefully we'll form that, and there'll be basically continuation of this discussion. Any other questions, comments from anyone? I'll put a question to the speakers. One of the things that sometimes it seems to be a daunting thing for a lot of young people who want to get involved in business and stuff are things like GST and BAST and all of that sort of thing. How do you deal with that in your co-op? Is there particular support to deal with that aspect of the collecting money, reporting, all of that?
Thanks, Siavash. I'm happy to field. Look, when I came into this, I had no idea at all. I couldn't read a balance sheet. You know, but I think what Peter was saying, it's actually not that, you know, you just got to demystify it. It's actually not that hard to learn this stuff. So that's one thing. And I went out and did a course with Forrester's Community Finance on how to read your balance sheet. And but what we've tended to do in the co-op is bring people in like Dan, who've got both a youth work and a business background, or a community work and business background. Dave, our founding coordinator, was a social work student who'd had a business ownership background. And yeah, so I think that stuff's really easy to learn. The mindset you've got to have in community enterprise is a little bit different than traditional community organisation, in that part of our framework is, I mean, our framework is actually titled Participation and Production. And so it's just balancing those two agendas of profit making, or, you know, getting money in, and being a participatory organisation that creates meaningful work roles for people. So you kind of got to have a kind of two heads, or, you know, a bit of a, you got to balance those agendas, and it's a creative tension. They swing and move a bit, and you're just trying to keep that in balance. But it's helpful to have people, say like Dan, who've got a bit of business background but a strong community practice also, I think. And you can work out the detail. It's not that hard. Yeah.
Great. Any questions? Any comments, questions from, what about the speakers? You don't have any questions from one another?
The quiet group, people. Does that mean we've made complete sense?
Nonsense.
Or nonsense, that's right. People are, I'd be interested if any of this resonated or makes sense in people's work context, kind of going, oh yeah, that was interesting information, or if people are going, oh, I'm curious. Yeah, and we have, just to say, we've focused on the cooperative story, which is one tradition of community economics. There are a whole bunch of other practices in this space. But this is probably one of the most effective to work with people that we think of as on the margins. Yeah, so.
Could I get a bit of information about the structure of the co-op? Like, you know, like, so it's people own, everyone's an owner. There's some owners and everyone else are participants, and they earn income through their own wares, or, yeah, what's the structure?
I'm happy to share our structure. So we're a not-for-profit, we're a charity. We're registered as a cooperative in Queensland. You could easily do what we've done under another, legal structure. But the members, co-ops are it's one member, one vote. And there's a set of principles around them as well.
Can I say something, Richard? Because that's crucial. Yeah. In a for-profit, your shares determine the amount of votes you have. You know, if you own 1,000 shares, you've got 1,000 votes. but in a cooperative, one vote, one member, you know. And there's now national co-op law. It's not state by state, just equal. You can operate across the country under one law. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So now we can't trade. Those co-op members can't receive income related to their share in the co-op. Okay. So then that's what, to be a charity, we chose to be a charity, so you can't make money off it, you know, as a shareholder. But other co-ops, you could, that, you know, if you were a for-profit co-op. But anyway, so our members, you know, in many ways, it's like a good incorporated association, which a lot of people have experience with, where members are really engaged, because that's also a democratic model. But there's some other things built into it. But how it works is, and you can design your own structure around it. They could be very egalitarian, or they can have a more structured in terms of the decision making. But there's a board, like at most other organisations, and that's made up of members. So, for example, there's a gentleman who works in the cafe. He's the president of the board. There's also some volunteers on the board we bring in for their particular expertise. But it's majority people with disabilities on the board, and then other people we bring in for their expertise as directors. Then they employ me, and I'm kind of a manager. And then I kind of, my responsibility is to manage the businesses and to see that they're economically viable and they're meeting the participation agenda of creating meaningful work. So we have a cafe and catering business. We manage the canteens on 2 soccer clubs that creates work for people from refugee backgrounds, as well as a food trailer that they run, a gardening business, small landscaping business, and there's the youth co-op. And there's some individuals, actually, members of the co-op, who have like a micro business, so a small mowing business that they get support from the co-op around in terms of finding customers or billing. So I'm sort of the coordinator, and then there's managers, business managers under there, and then worker members generally in that space, and workers with and without disabilities.
Can I add? Yeah. That's important, Richard. Worker members. So in a cooperative, you can be a member and on the board and still work and earn income, you know, which is different to a community association. If you're on the board, you cannot benefit financially. It's a separation. I mean, these are basically businesses where the workers own the business. So they sit on the board. And if you turn it into a for-profit, as Richard said, you could not only earn income as a worker, but you could earn dividends on your shares. Yeah, but it's not a for-profit, it's a non-profit. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, so that's the structure. Yeah. And you can tell, like, and then we do a bit of work in that around members meetings. Actually, Peter did a bit of research with us a few years ago, and we realised we were losing a bit of our cooperative ethos out of that, and we put a bit of extra energy into educating members, some of the newer members particularly, around, you know, that it was a cooperative business, that they're owner members of the organisation, and we do that through having a free lunch, and everyone turns up, and we have some planning and education that happens there, presentations. And then you know, but the really important thing for us to hear, or the really exciting thing for me to hear, is when people like Susan say, "We started this," like I did that, or we did that. And that's what this model can provide for people who commonly have stuff done for them or to them. To be able to say, oh, I did this, I achieved this, is just, you know, it's just great. Yeah. So that's what this structure allows. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
So I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Richard. Peter, Kenny has asked if you could give other examples. I think you mentioned that this is one example. Is there other examples that you want to talk about?
Of the community economic traditions? Yeah, well, I mentioned, you know, savings and loan circles are the big one around the world, where people in India and across parts of Africa, I worked in South Africa for many years, and women get together each week, pool a small amount of money, which they then loan to each other. And so the money's circulating, which gives them enough money to go and start small businesses or deal with a crisis. The point is, it's collective use of money, not individual. So, you know, community banking is a big tradition, you know, and historically many banks were mutualized. They were member-owned banks. And I bank with Bank Australia, which is a member-owned cooperative bank, the same thing that we're talking about. But many banks then demutualized and became, you know, ASX 200 corporations and for-profit. So community banks, community credit unions, local economic trading schemes where people create bartering systems in places and exchange skills. Governments hate them because you can't tax that exchange system. You know, I'll fix your car if you give me a massage, you know, whatever skills people are exchanging. A big one that's reviving around the world is community currencies and community stock exchanges that are place-based currencies. And the Bristol pound in Bristol, UK is the best known famously, but there's lots of this happening. So, you know, there's a few, there are lots of books on this stuff. It's really represents the new economy movement. And there is a new economy movement in Australia that meets regularly and has conferences, and it's pretty exciting space to work. And I think the question, what's the role of the youth sector? I think the role of the youth sector is to engage with this new economy movement. Yeah, and listen and learn and bring our expertise to it as well. Yeah.
Any questions, comments?
See you later.
See you
later.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Awesome. Thank you.
Bye, Susan.
Bye-bye.
See you, Susan.
Here.
Do we have anyone else that wants to make any comments, any questions from the panel?
Can I just say, Siavash, I think what I love about this is people have made time to step out of service delivery, and, you know, we've pulled into many, many meetings, you know, got to do this, got to do that, to reflect, pause and go, what are some other approaches
Yes.
to thinking about this crisis of endemic unemployment and young people being marginalized. This is good. And, you know, I hope some people join a ongoing learning group that we think about this, okay? But appreciate the time people have made, and thanks Siavash for setting it up and Amanda for supporting Siavash, yeah?
Oh, I've done very little. I was just about to say though, I always find when I talk to Siavash, she really does ground you again, and listening to you, Peter, and the other speakers this morning, you know, because you get so caught up in your day-to-day contract management, service delivery, KPIs, all of that. And at times you don't provide the space to stop and just reflect and go. And I always find that when I speak to Siavash, that he does have that ability to make you go, oh yeah, that's why we're doing what we're doing, and we can be doing things differently within the constructs that government tie us to. So
yeah.
And
Just to say, we're on the edge. There's a growing movement towards this practice, you know, and a growing investment in it. And it's to recognize that the market economy is failing many people. You know, a lot of people are getting very wealthy, but it's failing a lot of people. So there is a real groundswell of interest, and it would be good for the youth sector to be on that wave, not kind of be invisible. And I saw there was a question about pitfalls, and I'm sure Richard and Dan could give many, but yeah, there are many pitfalls to cooperatives and community development. The main one being we've been de-skilled as a culture in cooperation. We're used to solving our own problems and or failing to solve them, and not knowing how to work with others, and that process of cooperative work. We're not good at it. So the skills of cooperation need to be relearned. Yeah. And it's all, and just to say, how many of us really want to talk about money with other people? You know, it's kind of like a no-no, but we need to learn to do that. Yeah. So there are many pitfalls.
Richard, Dan, do any particular comments you want to make in terms of pitfalls that you have come across that people should be aware of?
Yeah, as Peter was saying, there's lots of pitfalls. I think actually the major pitfall is starting from a place that's not grounded in a group of people. Yeah. So where one person says, or a couple of people say, I've got a great idea for setting something up and this is how we're going to run it. So without testing it through those conversations with others, testing the reality of it, and often you do see examples of community organisations setting up, with all the best intentions, setting up businesses that fall down because they have no business knowledge in the area and haven't done some basic research around it, or they haven't done the development process well to sustain it. So you see that happening. So do your research, I think, and engage with people and make it a community conversation, I think, and then bring expertise in when you need it, where you think you need it. Don't think you can do everything, particularly in terms of the business side of things, I think. So you do see that sort of thing happening, which is a shame where there's positive energy, and it could have been, maybe if it was directed in a different way, it would have been a successful outcome. And I think one way around that is just to start small and experiment for a little while before you move into a larger venture. Anyway, look, the other thing I wanted to mention was, reach out to your peers and others who've done the journey a bit, either through this practice group you're looking at, Siavash, or through formats like the Social Enterprise Council. So that's, and there actually should be some government money coming into this space as well, was something I wanted to mention in terms of capacity building. The state government has announced a Social Enterprise Jobs Fund. So some of that money will be flowing to
organisations looking to do this kind of work but once the government's just been re-elected, so they're getting all that in place. But there's an $8 million jobs fund, so some of that will be flowing to these sort of opportunities. So watch that space.
Thanks, Richard. I think one big thing for us, I guess, to note is that unless, if we wait for the government by themselves or the industry, the businesses to actually help us, we're going to go back to where we were. So again, the big businesses will utilize this new crisis to basically increase their profit and maintain the wages low with young people, further casualize, and do all those sort of things with the promise that this is going to, have the trickle down effect. But I think the other things that we're talking about here, which Peter, Richard, Dan, and Susan eloquently described, is that not just it's building local economy, but it's building the community. Those conversations that they're talking about in terms of people coming together, even if you take away the economic value, the social value of that, I think it's, you can't put a figure in front of it, but it's so important in terms of actually a sense of well-being and a sense of community and support. So I think it's in times that we are facing in this crisis, I think there's something really to be said about the work that you guys are doing, and hopefully we can have more of that, more of the sector engaging in that field. We're very close to finishing time of 12 that we had said. I did post, emailed to everybody a survey that's in that also, as I mentioned again, ask if you're wanting to continue this discussion and be part of a community of learning. Peter, Dan, and Richard very generously, not only they've given their time to us today and shared their knowledge and expertise, but they've also have offered to be part of that community of learning and support the youth sector in that journey, which is an incredible, generous offer. And I think it'd be great for us, for anyone that's interested, to indicate that through that survey and come on board. If there's things that hasn't been said today, there's chance hasn't been. If you're wanting to make a comment about anything, again, the survey is there. But before we close, and I thank everybody, anyone has any other questions, comments, speakers, participants?
Thank you very much for a great presentation, and it's really valuable to learn from your experience. I just had a question about the how important was it for the cooperative to have that no interest line as a sort of a backup when you're reliant on sort of grant funding that's not always guaranteed when you're in your sort of infancy, I guess?
Yeah, that was really helpful. And we paid it off over like 15 years or something to the sisters. So that was really, really helpful in terms of just buying a ute, I think. And the Mountain Mowing Men went to Praxis actually, or Praxis gave them a small grant to help them buy their first ute. Actually, it was a donation to help them buy their first ute. So you got, yeah, that's really helpful. I mean, we use some of that, like the gambling grants and that, to get stuff as well. So yeah, really helpful. And there's actually a growing social finance system in Queensland. So there's groups like White Box. There's groups like social. I think Kelly was on the call before. She was from White Box. They're setting up social enterprises and trying to set up a fund providing low interest patient capital, they call it. So this is, I'm not really in this world, but yeah, so there's groups like that providing, accessible finance. So yeah, really helpful. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd be really interested to get the details for how to join some of those groups and to benefit from other people's experience. So that'd be great.
I think
well, we can maybe share some links and around and resources. Yeah, and yeah, Anila, that might be your domain, Siavash.
Yeah, we'll where we have information about this forum, we'll follow up with posting the video of this forum, and all the speakers. Richard, if you want to send me the PowerPoint that you had, the presentation, any other resources, Dan or Peter, we'll load them all there. And also, if people indicate, as I said, a survey has been sent out to you now in the last 20 minutes. So if you want to be part of that community of learning and continue the journey, please complete that, or give us any other feedback you like. I just, I guess, want to bring it to a close. It's 12 o'clock. Thank you so much, as Peter said, to give up your important time and all that you have on your agenda to joining this conversation. Special thanks to Peter, Richard, and Dan and Susan for generously again, giving your time and all sharing your knowledge. Thank you, Amanda, again for sharing your time, helping me out with facilitating today. That's it. We'll leave it here, and hopefully we will continue this journey with those of the people who are interested in being part of that community of learning. And the others, if you want to, if you thought that this forum was useful, you want to, I'll be sending out again a link to the video, which would be on the website of Yank, and you can share it with your colleagues and anybody else. So thank you, everybody, and have a nice rest of the day.
Thanks, Siavash.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Siavash. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Amanda. Appreciate that again.
No worries. We'll chat soon.
Vishal, cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.